This is John Henry Ramirez.
And there was a woman beside him. Another woman had remained in the van as a driver. Ramirez stabbed Pablo Castro to death, searched his pockets, and ran off with $1.25.
In 2004, with the help of a handheld weapon, Ramirez stabbed and killed 45-year-old Pablo Castro, a Corpus Christi store clerk in Texas. After his crimes, Ramirez fled. He evaded law enforcement agencies for 3 years, but was eventually captured near the border of Mexico in 2007. Ramirez was charged with capital murder in 2008 and faces the death penalty.
He was arrested 4 years later in 2008 when he was captured near the border.
Ramirez was 22 at the time of the murder and had a criminal record, including convictions for aggravated assault, burglary, and indecent exposure. He was also suspected of committing several other crimes around the time of the murder, including a string of burglaries and another stabbing. Ramirez's trial was delayed for several years due to legal challenges. He was finally convicted and sentenced to death in 2008. He was sent to death row, awaiting his execution. While on death row, Ramirez reignited his faith. He became close to his God and created a strong relationship with his pastor, Dana Moore. In mid-2021, the state announced that Ramirez would be executed by lethal injection in September. Although Ramirez agreed that his crime was heinous and that he should be penalized for it, he made only one request: that his pastor lay hands on him and pray for him at the moment of his death. The state refused his request. In August, he filed a federal lawsuit against the state for refusing his request. The suit claims that the refusal of the state to allow Ramirez's pastor lay hands and pray for him contravenes his right to the free exercise of religion and amounts to religious discrimination and violation of liberties. In March 2022, the Supreme Court ruled that the denial of Ramirez's request was a violation of his religious liberties. The suit delayed Ramirez's execution, but he got his request and was executed in March 2022. This would have been one of the most disturbing requests, but that of Jean Hathorne was just bone-chilling disturbing. This next death row inmate didn't insist on the hands of her pastor be rested on her as she passes, but instead, to have her turned into fish food. This is Jean Hathorne. Jean is on death row for the murder of 3 of his family members in October 1984. Jean and his accomplice, James Lee Baythard, attacked and killed Jean Sr., his wife, Linda, and their teenage son, Marcus. They planned to take the family out of the way and inherit the $150,000 property settlement. They were unaware that Jean Sr. had changed his will and disinherited Jean Jr. After the incident, Jean scattered African-American human hairs and cool cigarette butts to drive suspicion away from him. However, investigations revealed that he was responsible for their death and was arrested and charged with capital murder. During the trial, Jean claimed that Baythard was responsible for the killings, while he only fired through the window. Baythard was found guilty, convicted, and later executed despite his claims of innocence. Jean was also found guilty and sentenced to death. He maintained that he was innocent and appealed the court ruling. His attorneys claimed that the 1985 trial did not consider that he was abused by his father, which created hatred for his family. But his final request is where things get disturbing. Jean requested that his body be turned into fish food and fed to goldfish as part of art if his appeal failed. The unusual request involves using his body as an art installation that acts as a wider project on capital punishment. The 47-year-old Jean gave his consent to the artist, Chilean-born Marco Evaristi. Mr. Evaristi planned to deep freeze Jean's body and turn it into fish food so that visitors at his exhibition could feed it to a group of goldfish. Fortunately, Jean won his appeal, and his sentence was changed to 3 life terms of imprisonment. His request was abandoned. Grotesque as his request may seem, it was a good thing Jean won his appeal. Wouldn't want no fish eating that. However, Jean's request didn't meet the grotesqueness and bizarreness of Frank Atwood's request. This is Frank Atwood.
He also had guests present, including his wife and a Greek Orthodox priest. Now, the priest was in the execution chamber with Atwood.
Atwood is in prison for the 1987 murder of 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson. Atwood was 28 years old when he was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Vicki. He was charged with first-degree murder. Atwood has a history of sexual assault, having been convicted of sexually assaulting a 7-year-old boy. Following a 1975 law in California, he was termed a mentally disabled sex offender. During the trial, prosecutors sought the death penalty due to the nature of his crime, but he maintained that he was innocent. Judge John Hawkins wasn't convinced. He found him guilty and ordered that Atwood be executed within 2 months. However, due to the momentary pause in executions in Arizona at that time, Atwood spent more than 30 years on death row. The pause in executions resulted from an incident that occurred during the execution of another convict. The dose of drugs injected into the convict wasn't effective, and the prisoner struggled for air for more than 1 hour before he died. After the state had rectified the dosage issue and settled all legal concerns, they scheduled Atwood's execution for June 8, 2022. Atwood was convicted before 1992, when the law on execution by gas chamber was allowed. Therefore, he was allowed to choose between death by lethal injection or lethal gas. This is where things get disturbing. Atwood chose death by lethal gas, but requested nitrogen gas instead of the state-approved cyanide gas. The state didn't heed the request, and on June 8th, age 66, Atwood was executed by lethal injection. Although sad and disturbing, Atwood's request was not as disturbing as that of Thomas Douglas Arthur. This is Thomas Douglas Arthur.
On Thursday, May 25, 2017, Alabama inmate Thomas Arthur is set to be executed. Arthur was convicted of the 1982 murder of Troy Wicker in Muscle Shoals, Alabama.
Arthur is on death row for the 1982 contract killing of Troy Wicker. Wicker's wife, Judy, told the court that she paid Arthur $10,000 to kill her husband after an affair. Arthur met Judy during a work release program at Decatur, where Arthur was serving for a 1977 murder of his sister-in-law. Although Thomas admitted to killing his sister-in-law in Marion County, he insisted that he had no hand in the death of Wicker. His attorney suggested that Judy had pointed to Arthur as the killer as a way to escape the death penalty and get the possibility of parole. Arthur had been called Houdini because he has escaped execution multiple times. Arthur has been on death row since early 1983, making him the second longest inmate. Arthur's initial conviction in Wicker's death was overturned, and even the second conviction was still overturned. Finally, his conviction in 1991 was upheld. Arthur's execution was scheduled in May 2017, marking the 7th time he has been scheduled to be executed. The Supreme Court stayed his previous execution dates after Atwood appealed. However, that wasn't to be the case this time. But it's how Arthur wanted to be executed that is disturbing. Arthur accepted his fate, but requested that he be executed by firing squad rather than lethal injection. During his imprisonment, 75-year-old Arthur developed a back injury and was assigned to a wheelchair. He argued that death by lethal injection would be more painful and increase his pain. The court did not approve his request, and on May 26, 2017, he was executed in Alabama. Speaking of very disturbing requests, another interesting case is that of James Edward Smith, who requested for dirt as his last meal. This is James Edward Smith.
James Edward Smith was born on October 19, 1952.
James Edward Smith was a convicted murderer from Kentucky, United States, who made headlines in 1990 with his final request. Smith's story began in 1952. As a child, he was known for his love of the outdoors and often spent time camping and hiking with his family. He worked briefly as a taxi driver in Houston, Texas. However, as he grew older, he fell in with the wrong crowd and began committing petty crimes. Fast forward to March 1983. Smith attacked a teller at the Union National Life Insurance Company in Texas. He was armed and was wearing a mask. He pointed the gun at the teller and ordered her to hand over all the money. The scared teller ran and hid behind the filing cabinet. Unfortunately, Larry Don Rojas, the 44-year-old district manager, was at office. Smith ordered that he give him all the cash. Rojas did as he instructed. Still, Smith shot and killed the innocent clerk. He must have realized what he did because he ran away from the building, but he was arrested with the help of office workers and several people on the street. The money was also recovered. He was charged with capital murder. Smith tried to flee from the courtroom during his trial, but was captured in no time. In 1984, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. He was initially scheduled to be executed on May 11, 1988, but his mother appealed the ruling, stating that Smith was not mentally competent. After 2 years, another date was scheduled, and the mother appealed again. This time, Smith waived the appeals and insisted that he'd rather die and be reincarnated than remain in prison. Consequently, the court denied the mother's appeal. Wait till you hear his last request. Before his execution, Smith requested Rekunda dirt as his last meal. Smith believed in voodoo rituals and that eating the dirt would help him reincarnate. The state denied the unusual request because it wasn't part of the approved meals. In the end, Smith was executed by lethal injection on June 26, 1990. As weird as these requests were, they're nothing compared to some of the weirdest last words by people on death row. Click here.
The cops knew who I was after Richard Mallory died.